The JLP and PNP have been battling for decades, but only one party has truly controlled Jamaica's inflation, or so they claim. Is one party really to blame for Jamaica's skyrocketing food prices, or are they both just pointing fingers? Hey patriotic internet friends and family, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into the heated inflation debate rocking Jamaica. Prime Minister Holness has come out swinging, saying his Jamaica Labour Party, or JLP, has managed inflation way better than the People's National Party, PNP, since independence. That's a pretty bold claim. Make us see the stats, and we will get to the numbers and the stats in a bit to see if what he says is actually true or it has any form of merit to it. But is Holness right? Let's break down the drama, the numbers, and everything in between. Get ready for a political showdown. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more juicy updates on Jamaica's political and social scene. Welcome all patriotic Jamaicans. The movement continues. Make we get into it now. Let's kick it off. The inflation explosion. Let's start with the basics. Jamaica, like much of the world, is facing skyrocketing food prices on essential goods. People are feeling it at the grocery stores, and Holness wants to set the record straight. Food prices skyrocketed. We didn't cause it, he said. We had nothing to do with it, he said. Now the virtue signaling and the blame game start. But how much is the JLP really to blame or not? According to Holness, his government managed things so well that prices could have been much worse. The Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, shows global inflation rising, with their food price index hitting a recent high of 127.4 points. That's a 5.5% increase from last year. And here's the kicker. It's still 20.5% below the peak in March 2022. So yes, Jamaica's prices are soaring, but hey, at least they are not March 2022 bad, right? But Holness didn't stop there. He went back decades to lay out his case for why the JLP has always handled inflation better than the PNP. And trust me, the numbers tell a story. Historical showdown, JLP versus PNP. Now buckle up, because Holness took us on a trip through history with a side of shade. In fact, we are going back to 1962 when Jamaica gained independence. Holness breaks down inflation rates like a professor with a grudge. From 1962 to 1972, under the JLP, average inflation was 4.7%. Compare that to the global rate of 3.3%. Not bad, right? Then comes the PNP's turn. Under former Prime Minister Michael Manley, 1972 to 1980, inflation nearly doubled to 8.8%. Holness then points out that during Edward Seaga's tenure in the 1980s, the rate shot up to 13.5%, calling it a very difficult time. So what happened next? From 1989 to 2007, under the series of PNP leaders, Manley, PJ Patterson, and Portia Simpson Miller, inflation averaged a whopping 18.5%. Holness jokes that during this time, if you lived in the US, inflation would have been just 2.9%. So yeah, something doesn't quite add up. So when did inflation finally cool down? Stay tuned, because Holness is about to claim the JLP saved the day. The JLP comeback and Holness's final word. Fast forward to 2007 when the JLP took back control under Bruce Golding. Holness proudly stated states that during this period, inflation dropped to 12.3%. When Sims-Miller returned under the PNP, it dropped further to 6.3% between 2011 to 2016. And now, under Holness himself, he claims inflation is down to about 5% on average. That's right. Holness is essentially saying the JLP always manages inflation better. He even hit them with this zinger. The PNP increased the consumer price index by a whopping 6,186.6%. The JLP just 1,033.9%. To top it off, he declared that the JLP has and always will be the better manager of prices. Now let's wrap it up. So who comes out on top in this inflation showdown? According to Holness, the JLP. But is it fair to pin decades of economic challenges on one party over another? Or should we acknowledge global factors like the pandemic and worldwide inflation? Here's a summary of the key points. 1. Jamaica's rising food prices. Food costs spike amid global inflation, with Holness claiming his policies prevented even worse increases. 2. Historical comparison. Holness compared JLP and PNP eras since independence, highlighting lower average inflation under JLP rule. 3. Notable inflation periods. Inflation averaged 4.7% under JLP from 1962 to 1972, 8.8% under PNP in the 70s, and peaked at 18.5% under various PNP leaders between 1989 to 2007, and lowered to 5% under Holness. 4. The FAO Food Price Index global food inflation hit 127.4 points in October 2024, with steep rises in vegetable oils. Here are some detailed questions you might have regarding inflation in Jamaica, along with answers derived from the article. Question number 1. Why are food prices in Jamaica so high right now? Answer. Food prices in Jamaica, like much of the world, have been heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and global inflation. Prime Minister Andrew Holness points out that although prices are high, his administration's economic policies have prevented even steeper increases. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, the global food price index hit its highest levels in 18 months this October, and prices for essential items like vegetable oils have increased by over 7%. Holness argues that without careful fiscal management, these increases could have been worse for Jamaica. Question number 2. Is inflation only affecting Jamaica, or is it a global issue? Answer. Inflation is very much a global issue right now. Holness emphasized that countries like the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom are also struggling with rising costs. The pandemic disrupted supply chains worldwide, and this, combined with high demand, has led to soaring prices across the globe. The FAO's Food Price Index shows international food costs hitting significant highs, demonstrating that this problem extends far beyond Jamaica's borders. Question number 3. Is the JLP truly better than the PNP at managing inflation? inflation? Or is this just political spin? Answer: this is where things get complicated. According to Holness, historical data shows that inflation has typically been lower during periods when the JLP was in power. For example, between 1962 to 1972, inflation averaged 4.7% under the JLP, while from 1972 to 1980, under Michael Manley's PNP administration, it nearly doubled to 8.8%. Holness claims that whenever the PNP has controlled the government, inflation tends to be higher, whereas the JLP has a record of managing it more effectively. However, these statistics can be influenced by external global factors, and the debate is ongoing. Keynote and pay attention to that. Question number 4. Why does it feel like my purchasing power keeps shrinking? Answer: Holness points out that during years of high inflation, particularly between 1989 to 2007, under PNP administrations, Jamaican consumer purchasing power was destroyed. When inflation rates are high, the cost of goods and services rises faster than wages, making it difficult for people to keep up with their regular expenses. Holness argues that this loss in consumer purchasing power during PNP rule has long-lasting effects, affecting Jamaicans even today. Question number 5. How does Jamaica's inflation rate compare to other countries? Answer: historically, Jamaica's inflation rate has been higher than countries like the United States, where inflation has averaged around 2.9%. For instance, between 1989 to 2007, inflation in Jamaica was around 18.5%, which Holness compares unfavorably to the US rate. He argues that this contrast shows something is amiss, especially if other economies are handling inflation with relatively stable rates, while Jamaica faces significant increases. Question number 6. What has the current administration done to combat inflation? Answer: Holness claims that his administration has kept inflation in check, managing it down to an average of about 5% despite global pressures. He attributes this prudent fiscal and economic policies, which he argues have softened the blow of inflation that has hit almost every country due to the pandemic. For instance, during his administration, inflation has stayed well below the 18.5% average seen during some PNP administrations in the past. Question number 7. Is Jamaica's high inflation a long-term problem, or can it be resolved soon? Answer: high inflation has been an ongoing challenge for Jamaica, with roots going back decades. Holness argues that long-term solutions require consistent management and discipline to prevent the dramatic spikes seen in past decades. However, factors like global inflation and economic crisis can still play a role. So while the JLP promises better control over inflation, it's a challenge that can't be fixed overnight. Question number 8. Are past leaders responsible for today's high prices? Answer: Holness does make a case that past leaders have a share of the responsibility. He points out that inflation reached alarming heights under some PNP administrations, such as during Michael Manley's time in office in the 1970s, and again from 1989 to 2007 under PNP leaders. He argues that the economic choices of the past created long-term inflationary trends that still impact Jamaicans today. Question number 9. Is Holness blaming the PNP as a distraction from current issues? Answer: while Holness uses historical comparisons to highlight the JLP's track record, it's also clear he's positioning his administration as a better economic manager than the opposition. opposition. His comments come amidst public frustration over rising prices. So his comparison with the PNP could indeed be a way of reassuring the public that things could be worse under different leadership. Question number 10. What's the solution for Jamaicans facing rising prices? Answer. There is no immediate solution for high inflation, but Holness insists that the JLP will continue to manage fiscal policies carefully to avoid a worse crisis. However, structural improvements, economic reforms, and possibly external factors will be necessary to see real change. Holness emphasizes that under his leadership, inflation rates have stayed lower, signaling that careful management, in his view, is the best way forward. I hope these questions and answers may address any potential concerns that you might have about the rising food prices and inflation. Now let's get into my breakdown and commentary. What is inflation? What causes it? And why it's impacting Jamaica's food prices? What is inflation? Definition. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services rises over time, reducing the purchasing power of money. Simply put, when inflation occurs, your money buys less than it used to. For example, what 100 JMD could buy 5 years ago might now cost 120 Jamaican dollars or more, depending on the inflation rate. Inflation is measured using indicators like the Consumer Price Index (CPI), which tracks changes in the prices of a basket of commonly purchased goods and services, and indices like the FAO Food Price Index, which focuses on global food commodities. What's the root causes of global inflation? Global inflation occurs due to a combination of factors, many of which are interconnected. Here are the key contributors. 1. Demand pull inflation. This happens when demand for goods and services outpaces supply. During the COVID-19 pandemic, governments worldwide stimulated economies with cash assistance, creating a surge in demand for products that supply chains struggled to meet. 2. Cost push inflation. Rising cost of production, including raw materials, labor, and transportation, lead to higher prices for consumers. For example, disruption in global oil production drives up transportation costs, affecting everything from food distribution to manufacturing. 3. Supply chain disruptions. The pandemic caused major bottlenecks in global supply chains. Ports were closed, shipping was delayed, and raw materials became scarce, causing a ripple effect of price increases. 4. Global events. Geopolitical issues like the Russia-Ukraine war have significantly impacted global inflation. Ukraine is a major exporter of wheat and sunflower oil, and disruptions in their supply chain have led to higher prices for staples like bread and cooking oil worldwide. 5. Currency devaluation. When a country's currency weakens against others, importing goods becomes more expensive, further driving inflation. Why does global inflation affect food prices in Jamaica? Jamaica, like many developing countries, is heavily reliant on imports for food and other essential goods. Here's how global inflation impacts the cost of food locally. locally. 1. Imported inflation. When the prices of global traded food commodities increase, it directly affects Jamaica. For instance, if the price of wheat or vegetable oil raises globally, Jamaicans pay more for bread, pastries, and cooking oil, even if those goods are made locally. 2. Rising transportation cost. Higher global fuel prices drive up the cost of shipping food to Jamaica. Since much of the country's food is imported, these additional costs are passed down to consumers. 3. Exchange rate fluctuations. If the Jamaican dollar weakens against major currencies like the US dollar, it costs more to import goods. This adds to the overall inflation felt in food prices. 4. Global commodity prices. According to the FAO Food Price Index, global prices for items like vegetable oil have risen significantly, 7.3% in October alone. This increase affects Jamaica, where such commodities are staples in many households. Why does inflation hit food prices the hardest? Food prices are particularly sensitive to inflation because of their reliance on global supply chains, weather conditions, and commodity markets. When production costs rise, it's almost immediately felt at the consumer level because food is an essential, non-negotiable expense. In Jamaica, this is compounded by 1. The country's dependence on imports for staples like wheat, rice, and cooking oil. 2. High transportation costs due to global oil price increases. 3. Limited domestic agricultural output compared to demand. Inflation's local impact. The Jamaican perspective. Prime Minister Andrew Holness has pointed to external factors like the COVID-19 pandemic and global inflation as primary drivers of rising food prices in Jamaica. While his government claims to have managed the situation better than it could have been, the effects are still deeply felt. Historically, Jamaica has faced periods of high inflation, often due to poor fiscal management and reliance on external markets. For instance, 1. Between 1972 and 1980, under Michael Manley, inflation averaged 8.8%, driven by oil price shocks and economic instability. 2. More recently, the FAO reports that the global food price index has hit an 18-month high, showing that the issue isn't isolated to Jamaica, but part of a global phenomenon. Conclusion: why it matters. Inflation isn't just about rising prices, it's about the erosion of financial stability for families, especially in countries like Jamaica, where imported goods are central to the economy. Understanding its causes and effects is crucial to finding sustainable solutions, whether through boosting local production, managing fiscal policies, or improving trade resilience. Takeaway: while global inflation is largely out of Jamaica's control, strategic economic management can soften the blow, ensuring that the cost of living doesn't spiral beyond reach. What do you think? Has the JLP really outperformed the PNP in managing Jamaica's economy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Let me address this quick little issue. If you are a die-hearted PNP or a die-hearted JLP, this channel I go offend you a lot. Me I go say things we I go offend you a lot. You will be offended. This channel definitely not gonna be for you, cause guess what? Me I go call out your favorite political parties when them a do foolishness. Yes. So this channel is not a cheerleader for either of your two favorite political parties. This channel is a cheerleader for a better Jamaica, and Jamaicans want to see a better Jamaica. So yeah, if the PNP do good, me I go cover it and me I talk about it, me I big them up. If the JLP do good, me I go cover it, me I go big them up and me I talk about it. So if you cannot handle any form of constructive criticism in one objective way, this channel is definitely not for you. Because I realize a lot of people are not critical thinkers and they are not open-minded to hear a different perspective that may go against what they believe and what they like. You understand? So this channel is not to cater to your feelings and emotions.